I don't expect that you would, but some of you may know that UC Davis is about to start a heart transplant program. And so it's been in the queue for about 5 years. For about 5 years, I've been hearing that it's this year, and we're in the 5th year of that. But I think it's probably true this year, and on the worst scenario, it'll be early next year. I think we're closer than we've ever been to be there. And so there's a lot of activity in our work to try to build a good heart transplant program at UC Davis. So from my perspective, I've been doing some work from the rehabilitation point of view. And so I'm going to share some of that work today. And in addition to that, this is, I think, interesting for this group in the sense that you all may know Sharon Myers. And some of this work was done by Sharon Myers. Sharon was a nurse who I'm sure presented here before, and you guys know her from before. So this is some of her work that I'm going to present today. This presentation has a couple of videos in it. Actually, it has one video, about 2.5 minutes. And then it's supposed to have some audio, but I am still waiting for the regulatory IRB to give me permission to play the audio. So in real time, I'm waiting for that email that we've been trying to clarify this with them. So if I don't have right before I get to the audience, I'm going to look at my email just so you know. And if I don't have an email that says, yes, you can play the audio, I'll read the audio. I have the text, and then I have the audio of the people who said what it was. And so we'll hopefully, we followed the email now a couple of times this morning to try to get a final answer. Otherwise, I'll read you what it says, and I'll explain the setting when we get there. Okay? So with that in mind, I'm going to share my screen. Can everyone see my screen now? My slideshow. Reshare because I did not click on the audio.
Things you didn't learn in medical school.
Yeah. All right. Good. So this is a brand new talk for me. So it's the second time I give it. I just gave it 2 days ago, Wednesday afternoon, to the transplant program. So right hot off the press. And the work that I'm going to present at the end is not yet published. We're working to publish it. So if it gets a little technical, just throw some tomatoes at me or something, and I'll move on from the technical stuff. You had a question here?
Oh, no, I didn't see your share screen, but I guess it's coming up now.
Yeah, you should
All I
be.
have is a,
He's our QA to make sure that the outside viewers can see it.
no, because I take snapshots. Right now it's got the little.
Okay, so the project is the title of the project is Enhancing Recovery After Heart Transplant. And what we've done is a patient participation approach to co-designing a new rehabilitation program. Lots of words there. So patient participation means that we brought the patients to talk to us early in the process of developing the program. We use a co-designing strategy, which I'll cover a little bit what that means. It's a technology industry concept that we're trying to apply in the healthcare system. And what we're trying to build as a new technology, but it's really not a technology, we're trying to build a new program for prehabilitation. This is in contrast to rehabilitation, which is what most people think about, which is what you do after you've had surgery or after you had a trauma or an injury or car accident or something. This is the concept of doing the same preparation, the same type of activity that we do in rehabilitation, but doing it before you were to have your surgery. And the reason for that, which I'll go over, is simple. The better fit you are before you're going to be stressed, the better you are at getting through the stress moment. But this is true in life. This is why you come here and work out. This is why you eat all the time healthy. So you are in the best position the day this unknown stress that may come to you shows up. You are best fit to handle it. Here, what we're doing is we know you're going to have surgery in the case of a heart transplant patient. And so we want to prepare you to the max that we can for you to withstand the stress of the heart transplant. And so that's the concept of prehabilitation. This is a team effort. So Cindy Matsumoto, Sharon Myers, and Themis Yaslas, which you all know from the past, were in my CoDesign team and have helped put this work together. And I honestly tell you that if it wasn't for them, we would be talking about 2 slides instead of 30 slides. Okay. So this is really the heavy load on this work is from their effort. So I have no disclosures to give, no conflicts with this presentation. This work has been funded by the American College of Cardiology. They have a foundation that funds quality initiatives in healthcare. And so we were funded last year to do this work. We have been invited now from the American College of Cardiology Quality Summit, which is a national meeting on improvement of healthcare systems. And we were invited to give a presentation at the meeting in Los Angeles. So this is actually the test drive for that presentation I'm going to deliver. And I've added a few things for your benefit and orientation and education. So what are going to be my learning objectives? I'm going to review initially some of the potential benefits of a rehabilitation program for heart transplant patients. I'm going to touch upon how the process of co-designing a prehabilitation program for people on a heart transplant waiting list works out. I'm then going to briefly mention some of the barriers that we learned and that we had through the process as a way of, in the future, when we do this again, how to do it better. And at the end, I'm going to end with what we learned from the program or from the project, which is what should we be putting in a program for prehab for patients? What kinds of things did patients tell us? Because what we did is we talked to patients, and I'm going to show you the transcripts of those conversations. And so we were having the patients contribute to the discussion of what should we be covering in the program? Should we be exercising this way? Should we be doing, meditation? What are all these lifestyle possibilities? What should we be doing, which is specific to the prehab or to the patients who are waiting for a transplant in the near future? So let's start with the review of things. So, and this is the part that I added specifically for this conversation. So, so I just want to review a little bit of some new things that are happening in the world of transplantation. So this is from the organization that oversights all the procurement of organs in the United States. And this is actually the front page of their website. They say in 2021, thousands of people were given an incredible gift, one they carry wherever they go every day. It's the gift of life beating in their chest, an organ donated by a generous donor or donor family. Last year, organ procurement organizations and transplant hospitals worked to perform a record of 3,817 heart transplants across the country. That's in 2021. Before COVID, it was actually below 3,000. So, and then they say the average for 10 years, what the accomplishment in the country has been 31,238 transplants. So roughly about a little bit over 3,000 transplants a year. Just to give you reference, there's about 6 million people in the United States living with heart failure who could potentially at some point become a transplant patient. So it's really a very small fraction of people with heart failure who ever ends up with a transplant. Most people with heart failure we take care of with medications and other therapies. So transplant is not necessarily a last resort, but it's not a resource that everyone has to end up with. It's still, in terms of population, is still a small population who ends up needing a transplant. So some of the reasons why we have increased the amount of transplants that are occurring, it's not because we have less people that need a transplant. There's always large amounts of people on a waiting list for a transplant, but it's been for changes in the way we have we go about procuring organs. And so they are what's called standard criteria for organ transplantation, which is the way we've always done it for decades. And then there is these extended criteria. So these are ways that we can divert a little bit from the standard criteria and take some chances, if you will, to transplant an organ. So when an organ becomes available in some place in the country, the local hospital that has the ability to procure the organ, because that patient is in that hospital, then puts out an announcement. This all happens very fast in real time. An announcement to the organizations that do this, and then they do a quick evaluation And the surgeons that are waiting on their hospitals around across the country are waiting for these messages, phone calls and text messages and whatnot. And when that information shows up, they have to decide on the spot, do I take that organ or not? And then the one surgeon said, I don't like what I hear here. I'm not taking that organ. Then the next surgeon gets a chance. So it's essentially a somewhat of a bidding system, if you will. And it's up to the surgeon to decide whether they are going to take the risk, because it is a large ordeal and a risk to take. And so they need to decide based on their knowledge and experience that they can actually maneuver, go and get that heart, transport the heart back to their home hospital, and then transplant. You can imagine there's a lot of issues of, you need a plane, you need, how long am I going to fly there, fly back, how soon this, lots of technical components that goes into this. So one of the things that's changed is we have traditionally waited for what's called brain death to then procure the organ. And most recently, this cardiac death has become a more common. It's not yet the most common, it's just become more frequent. And so these are people who have the same level of injury and a reason why they're an organ donor, but they haven't quite yet met all the criteria, which is fairly stringent criteria for being brain dead. Once you become brain dead, you're essentially dead, and that sounds redundant, but that's the point. The brain death, at the moment of brain death, you're no longer, there is a need to keep all the life support equipment on, and that's there's a legal definition to this. So once the process has been executed, people can't contend to that, and so every so often you hear a Supreme Court of somebody contending to that and fighting it, and that's actually how it has to do. There's rules for this, and if you don't like the rules, you got to take it all the way to highest court to ask the process to stop. Otherwise, the process of unplugging the machines is done because the person is brain dead at that point. Now, there are people who don't mean necessarily fully the brain dead category, but in conversations between the doctors and the family, there is an agreement that this is imminent and there's no reason to prolong what it is. And this is a very personal experience for each individual in each family. And today I'm not trying to debate and discuss that, but this is a reality. This is what happens. And so those patients, then there's the opportunity. Once a decision at the bedside of the caring physicians is done, as a second step downstream, then there is a conversation. Well, now that we have decided that we're going to withdraw the care, eventually at that point, it's a withdrawal care conversation. Then comes the question, well, since you're planning to withdraw care, will you be willing to donate? Or if they have already designated on their license that they're donors, then they can invoke the process of donation. And then this is the strategy, it's the DCD strategy, which is after cardiac death, not after brain death. Now, what happens there is you then have a heart, because you don't prolong this either. You have the risk of having a heart that may be for a prolonged period of time not being provided blood flow. And you would imagine, just like when you have a heart attack, if you don't give enough blood flow to the heart for a while, it doesn't do well. It gets weak and injured and fails. So there has to be technological support to be able to do this. And so this is the technological support that helps do this. This is a machine that allows us to take the heart out of a body and plug it in as if the heart is performing in a setup, and then you create a circuitry of blood, and essentially this heart is able to ex vivo function and support the heart for a prolonged period of time. So you don't have to keep this person that you've decided to withdraw care alive for another 2 days until the whole process goes on for transplant. You allow that family to go through the process of closure and grieving and everything else, and you're able to then separate the heart and maintain the heart then alive as an organ. So the heart goes in this bucket here, and then there are these cannulas or tubing that goes in. That's simply was the arteries in your heart, in your body. And then there's a long machine, and then there's a kidney, so the blood circulates. There's a pump, there's a kidney machine, and there's a long machine in here, so there's oxygen being given, and toxic materials are being removed. And this allows the heart to now be procured in Hawaii and then flown to somewhere on the other side of the country, while the heart is still actively beating and doing better. So the
So that
data,
machine flies with it to wherever it's
that's
going.
right. This is a luggage bucket. This comes with this is the machine, and then they put a little, cover on top. And there's a guy rolling like this on the airport. And then loading on a plane, and there it is. It's self-sufficient. This thing runs. I don't know, I'm gonna joke about it, but it probably has like a nuclear, energy source in it, so it doesn't need any power from anything. So really, the technology behind this is, so this is self-sufficient unit. So it doesn't matter what's happening. It varies between hours to 24 hours. So, and it's up to the surgeon to decide that too. So it's part of the decision making of the surgeon. So is he going to be in here for only 4 hours? Is he going to be in 6 hours? Is it going to be 8 hours? Each surgeon has to decide that long enough. The other beauty of this, that you can measure the function of the heart. So it's essentially, you can see how long, the heart gets put on, how well it's doing. And if at some moment the function starts deteriorating, by the time that it lands and it arrives to the hospital, they can check the function. And if the function is no good, then the surgeon still has the ability to turn it down on the spot. But my understanding is that the data so far is that they compared this to the standard way that it's been done for decades. And so far is no better, no worse. And it allows the longer period of time for the travel, which then opens the door. And this is this accomplishment of more transplants, this record transplant number in 2021 is attributed to the increased use of discipline.
What is that called?
It's a transportable. This is actually I apologize. This is actually a picture of a liver machine, but it's the same concept as the heart. It's a transportable perfusion device. I don't have, but I'm going to show you a video that's actually going to explain this more realistic. Transporter.
Is it carry-on luggage? So they should sort of take.
They're gonna make you check it or carry it on?
I just need to now make sure that we have volume.
Gotta be an expensive piece of equipment.
That's why it's taken them 5 years to set up their program.
This presentation accompanies the review article.
Oh, the right video. Sorry.
It wasn't showing on the screen. Yeah.
First, make sure I have the right video.
Not showing, so.
Yeah. This is the right video. Now I'll share it here. Here.
Make sure the sound is on video right too.
There you go.
So this is a UCLA video, UCLA Transplant Center, a large one on its own merits, and they already use this technology that I'm presenting to you. So they are going to do, this is, I think, a video they have to explain to the world what they do. So this is intended for lay people to understand what UCLA does, but this just described the approach and the abilities.
For the past 40 years, we have been taking the hearts for transplantation and preserving them or keeping them in a cooler during the transport, literally a cooler, and transported to UCLA or other medical centers where the heart transplant procedure is being performed. This concept of so-called heart in the box or organ care system is a platform that allows the donor hearts to not be preserved on ice, but rather in a beating normal, near normal physiologic state. It may allow us at one point to do better matching of the donors and recipients so that we can find the most suitable recipient of a donor heart and may even think about transporting hearts long distances.
This is the start of technology that may in the future allow us to take a donor and say, okay, there's somebody I'm donating here in Hawaii, there's somebody in Illinois that is a very good match for this and is going to have less rejection, and so that person can get that organ. We've already gone through to make sure that the device will work, and now we are making sure that it works as well as the standard therapy, which is to put the heart on ice.
UCLA has been a pioneer in the field of solid organ transplantation. In fact, there are more solid organs transplanted at UCLA than any other medical center in the country. Many of the advances in the field of transplantations have pioneered and advanced at UCLA.
I tell people that I feel like I am in the first Apollo mission to the moon. I'm just getting in the capsule, basically. This is really the start of something that's going to be an incredible revolution, in my opinion, in heart transplantation.
I'm going to stop there for a second, and if anybody has any questions or want to comment about this before I move on to the rest of the talk. It was a good advertisement for UCLA, I know. But I thought it kind of captures the excitement around this new technology that will hopefully allow UC Davis as well to expand what we do. Yes.
What are the criteria to minimize rejection?
So rejection is a more of an immune thing. There has to be an immune compatibility. So when you're being screened for a transplant, the very first immune test they do is a blood type, but that's the most rudimentary. They do a very, very detailed, very, very deep testing for different kinds of antibodies and things on your red blood cells and your white cells that are very idiosyncratic to you. And what they do is they do a cross match, just like they do for blood transfusions. And so the blood of a patient who needs a transplant gets very well tested, very detailed profile, and then the blood of a donor gets also tested. And this is where the match comes into place. They're matching. Part of the match is size, the chest wall, that kind of thing, but that's kind of the minimal portion of here. It's really the immune matching, what they're doing to make sure that your body wouldn't reject it when the organ goes in your body, doesn't have a rejection. The other part of the matching is eliminating infectious diseases like viruses and things like that. And there's some very intricate strategies to avoid viruses that are in one organ to go to the body of the person, or if the organ has the virus and then the recipient has the virus, sometimes they accept that kind of organ. So that's part of the pairing or the matching is, I have a patient that has CMV, for example, which is a virus in their body. I have a heart that has CMV, so maybe we can accept giving that, or hepatitis is the other. So there are different kinds of viruses that sometimes they're willing to accept. The fact that the organ has it because the patient has it, so it wouldn't be a new infection too. So it's a very complex science what they do for the matching, and they're constantly evolving it. So, yeah.
Dr. Lopez, you mentioned that this machine was for a liver, not for a heart.
Yeah, this picture is a liver machine, actually.
Yeah, right. But does that mean that livers are this technology is already being applied to livers and been approved and everything?
Yeah, I don't know what the approval part, but it's definitely being applied for livers, and all the solid organs are all being studied in this context to see if using this for those other organs also extend the time and the recovery of those organs when they're transplanted. So this is kind of the cutting edge on all organ transplants, solid organs, you say.
So what's a non-solid organ?
Bone marrow. So transplant of a bone marrow for like leukemia, cancer. That's a non-solid. Okay, so the challenge on a transplant is death. So we're fighting death from heart failure versus transplant, and so we're trading off situations at that point. So there are three kinds of death when people have a transplant. There's an early phase, there's a constant phase, and a late phase. So the constant phase is depicted by this line here. It's kind of the rate of death, which is about 4% per year, which is attributed to things that you cannot change, like your age, your race. And the authors say social economic factors difficult to change. I think they're wimping out. We can change social economic factors. We just have to have the will to do it. So there are reasons why the authors accept that this is not a changeable rate, that this cannot change. But then there is this early phase, and this is time here in years, and this is the rate of death. So, you know, the highest rate of death is really in the first few weeks post a transplant. A rejection will be a rejection situation. It will be a reason why people die really early. And as time goes by, that death rate kind of goes down to roughly about a year. So the largest amount of death happens in the first year. So if you make it through the first year, then the next couple of years are really pretty good. And then after 4, 5, 8 years, then the rates go up again because now you're having long-term complications from having a transplant. These are usually either the arteries of the heart, and we don't understand the biology of this very well, but the arteries of the heart start kind of plugging up, and it's not plaque from atherosclerosis. It's a completely different biological process. It's very difficult to treat. And so some of the people that end up with a second transplant, that's what's happening. They just get this clogged arteries 6, 8 years down the road. And the only way to treat it is to give them another transplant. Otherwise, people with long-term organ transplants and long-term immunomedications may have complications of cancer. So there may be some cancers that may happen 6, 8 years down the road. And so some of this death that comes in the late phase has to do with that. So they call it long-term due to diabetes, obesity. So this is the other comorbidities you have by the time you have the transplant, or maybe catching up with you, and that may be their alternative reasons, or potential transplantation complications, with what I was saying, the cancers being a good example of that. So prehabilitation, which is what we're interested in doing, is meant to affect this time here, the early time. So that's the time frame in which we want to have prehab come in and help people. Can we help people before the surgery so during that first year they do the best they could potentially do? So this is kind of the benchmarks that we're working with, and this is the complicated graph, so I'm going to skip it, but just so I can point out. So this is data from 2018 onward. We know that people spend about 55 days on a waiting list for a transplant when they're posted. Their death waiting for the death rate waiting for a transplant is about 11%. So this is kind of the benchmark we're working on and against. Once you have a transplant, you spend about 21 days in the hospital. That's the average length of stay in the hospital after a transplant. And the post-transplant mortality since 2018 is about 12%. So on the first year. So what we propose that prehab is going to take people who die at a rate of 11% waiting, and hopefully in the future, we can get them to survive at a rate less than 12.5% on the first year. And we would like prehab to help us reduce this length of stay. If we can get people out, and staying in the hospital is an indication that you're having trouble recovering. If you're recovering fast, chances are you get out of the hospital faster. So this is not a target on its own merits. It's just a surrogate to the fact that likely you're doing better if you're getting out of the hospital a day, 2 days, 3 days earlier. So we like that metric quite a bit. Changing rates of mortality takes a lot of work and a lot of time. So in the short term, we're interested more in these kinds of metrics, the kinds of time in the hospital or time in the ICU or time that you will spend on the respirator, which as a patient are, to spend 1 day less on that respirator, you probably feel a lot better. So we're proposing that prehab, a well-developed prehab program will actually ultimately end up changing these metrics.
When they're in the hospital after surgery, the hospitals are terrible as far as diet is concerned.
Yeah.
So they don't put them on a plant-based diet.
Well, we're trying to change that.
Yeah, because hospitals are awful. I just once served a plate of broccoli as a vegetarian meal.
Yeah. Wow.
I would say bacon and eggs.
So that's a vegetarian meal. So let me just say, your point is well taken. Hospitals are notoriously the worst to figure out what to feed people. And the quality of it too.
Why is that? Trained
I-
dietitians?
Well, dietitians don't decide what happens in the kitchen. So, but let me just say what's happening at UC Davis. We actually have the chief nutrition officer at UC Davis, the person in charge of the entire nutrition program in the hospital. It's actually a plant-based person. And he understands the value of plant-based, also really, really into sustainability. So he's actually moved UC Davis into an awesome direction towards the nutrition aspect of this. And it's not just for patients, he's doing it also for the cafeteria. So guess what? There is always a plant-based option in the cafeterias at UC Davis now. Every day at lunch, I get to eat plant-based provided by UC Davis. And they have a meat-based entry and a combo and a plant-based combo. You have two choices, and each one of them has like 4 or 5 items to it, and you can pick and choose. You want the corn, you want the quinoa, you want the potato cake, So you get to choose 2 out of the 4 or 5 options for your combo. And so this is what happens at the level of the cafeteria now. And then this option they are providing it. And then the other thing he believes is in using local resources. So he's trying to get UC Davis to buy local. So we use the ingredients of the season that are being produced local. So he's moving the nutrition aspect of UC Davis all in this right direction. Do patients notice the difference? Nah. I still get the complaint when I go to say, how you doing? Are you eating? And it's like, yeah, they brought me whatever. Do I still hear that? Absolutely, yes. Has the leadership on the top changed and they're trying very hard to change the culture? Yes, and we're looking forward to do that. So
It's
a big shift to turn.
it is a big, it is centuries of tradition to change. But I think from a leadership point of view, we got a good person on top now that really cares about this and is really moving it forward.
Do they use oil?
I'm sorry?
Do they still use oil?
I'm sure they still use it. So they don't advocate necessarily an anti-inflammatory stop arthrosclerosis diet. It's just mostly a plant-based diet. And then this is where the dietitians have the power to then help, choose for the individual patient whether they need to go to the lower oil, for example, state or not for the individual patient. They still cook it with butter. I heard him talking and talked about the olive oil and a little butter. And it's like, okay, you can still do better, but we're a lot better than I've seen in most other hospitals. The only hospital that I ever seen better than this is an Adventist hospital. I trained at an Adventist hospital in Washington, D.C. And the community made lines around the building to eat in the cafeteria how good the vegetarian food was. So they had actually an hour and a half for the staff, and then they closed for the staff and they opened for an hour and a half for the community. And people will line up around the building to wait for their hour and a half to come in to eat lunch. It was like a restaurant, like the best restaurant in town. So
Where is that?
in Washington, D.C. So this is a cartoon that tries to explain how prehab works. And so I'm going to spend a minute here trying to explain it. So in this scale here, in the y-axis scale, it's really looking at your functional capacity. Then they put this line, what's called the line of dependencies, red line here, is trying to say, if you're above that line in terms of your ability, for example, exercise, and how long you can walk would be an example of functional capacity. If you're at a level where you can do enough, you're independent with your walking, for example, then that's before surgery, you're at that level. When you have surgery, everyone suffers a stress. And so your abilities to function goes down as the level with surgery. You can't get out of bed right after a heart transplant and start walking, right? So now you're dependent. You depend on somebody helping you with that. Same thing with eating, same thing with breathing until you get off the breathing machine. So this could be any one of these features. With all of these features that you were capable and independent before, you lose them with surgery. And then right after surgery, as you start recovering, you gain them back. And then at some point after time after the procedure, you go back to a steady state again where you can function. And this is just a conceptual model of what normally happens to people. You take a dip with surgery, takes you some time to get better, and now you actually back to a baseline stable state. So what happens if you have a complication or you have to stay on the respirator longer because you're weak, or you have some infection, or you have diabetes and other things, and your kidneys actually take a hit, or some variation of that. So you start kind of at that functional level. You have to have some functionality before you're taken to a transplant. If you're so dependent, so below this line, you probably will not be offered a transplant. You have to be some level. You'll take the same hits, but now because of all the comorbidities and or complications, it takes longer to recover, and you don't quite get back to where you started because of all of those challenges that you had. And so your new baseline after the transplant may actually be worse off where you were, depending how different that variance is. And this is what the surgeon is looking at. This is what your transplant doctor is looking at. Is there enough of these comorbidities already that I know that even with a transplant, they're just not going to make it up that line of dependency? No one wants to give a transplant to a patient who is bedridden and unable to take advantage of that opportunity. So there is a concern about how well and functional you can become after the transplant. So so far, this is what usually happens. This is the normal existing process, natural process. This is what we propose will happen with prehab. You take a person with the same preoperative, so during that 55 to 100 days that they're waiting for transplant, and you basically rehabilitate them. In other words, you work with the different things: exercise, nutrition, metabolic, mentally, spiritually, psychologically, and you strengthen the person, the whole person, the holistic person, in such a way that when you go to surgery and you take your hits, you don't dip as low in the below your line of dependency. And so when you recover after that, you recover at a higher place than where you started. So you're maximizing where you land at the end by starting at a higher place. Not, this is the surgeon here and the healthcare system. We're holding that constant in this conversation. This is adjusting and improving the patient in such a way that you land at a higher place than you would otherwise if you didn't have the prehab opportunity. And of course, if you have a complication, even if you have prehab, you probably land higher than you would without the prehab. You may not land as high as somebody who didn't have a complication, but we expect that you will be better off than somebody who didn't have a prehab. And so that's the conceptual model for what we're trying to do. So this is it is on guidelines, and this is from the Cardiac Surgery Recovery Society, and they just recommend that we do these kinds of things beforehand to improve the perioperative care and improve the clinical outcomes and save money. Because when you get out of the hospital 2 or 3 days earlier, guess what? You save a lot of money. So this is good for everyone. So it's good for the patient, it's good for the healthcare system. So it's a win-win for everyone. These are the reasons they say this is a great thing. Enable the patient to withstand the stress of surgery by augmenting their functional capacity. I just explained that. It is expected to improve the physical and psychological readiness for surgery. So you're better prepared when you go in as a person. Reduce the postoperative complications and the length of stay, and improve the transition from hospital to community. So this is a big one. When you get out, if you end up in that green line that I show you in the cartoon, you may not go home out of the hospital. You may have to go to a nursing home for a little while, a skilled nursing facility, do a rehab hospital or something. So you don't go straight to home. So if we improve people's abilities, we propose that we can get people from the hospital to home. And that would also be a win-win for everyone. So,
Dr. Lopez, looking at that model and then looking at the description of it there, it seems like that model could be applicable to every surgery undergone by the human being. The better shape and better health they are before going in under the knife, more likely their recovery will be quicker and less complicated. But in this case, it's geared toward cardiac, it's geared toward the transplanting. So, my mind is cranking on this as you're talking about, because I was going to ask you, what do the numbers look like now today, as far as the last graph, where obviously with surgery you take a hit and you return somewhere above or below? Is there any data that
Yeah,
tells us
absolutely.
about where we are now?
Yeah,
and
absolutely. So there is only one data point on heart transplant patients, and I'm going to show it to you in a minute.
Oh, Cool.
There is lots of data in other surgeries, colorectal surgery, liver surgery, bypass surgery. All of these other surgeries have already had clinical trials showing that this helps. Why are every hospital not doing it? It beats me. I don't know. But the data's out there for most operations, orthopedic surgery, hips, you exercise in bed. You can't walk. Great. Exercise in bed for 2 weeks before your hip surgery. Guess what? You wake up, get up of the bed much faster. The time to get out of the bed after surgery usually gets shortened by just doing, and it doesn't take very long. Even a week or two is good enough to actually see a difference already. So the longer you wait a little bit, in terms of usually weeks, the longer you wait preparing yourself for surgery, usually the better you are with just about every surgery has been looked at.
That's good news.
So yeah, so we're leveraging decades of information on other surgeries to propose that this ought to work in the heart transplant population. So
I sort of think it's sad you have to argue the point, but I guess that's what you have to do.
yeah,
Duh.
It makes too much sense.
I should come with me to administrative meetings and say things like that. When I say things like that, I get written up as an old cranky man that don't get invited to the next meeting. Feel free to say that when you guys are.
Wearing this shirt, and this guy says that for him to get ready for a fight, a professional fight, 2 months of hard training. So you take a person who's not getting, but they're getting ready for the fight of the fight.
Yeah, you're correct.
Anything that they do to prep, given the amount of time, is going to help them.
That's the premise of this.
Yeah.
So I'm having trouble going in the direction I want to go.
We're
Okay, here. So this is the data point. There's a data point now. So we've been working on this project since 2020. And we put the grant and then got the money in 2021 to do the project. I'm going to show you in a second. It's my time, Michael. Well, I'm running out of time. And so just in April of 2022, Martin Cadera, who's the head of transplant at UC Davis, head of heart failure and transplant, was at the International Heart and Lung Transplant meeting. And he saw this. He took a picture of it and texted me. It's out there. Okay, so this is what he saw. Rehabilitation in patients on a waiting list for heart transplant improves postoperative outcomes. It's the first data set in the world being presented, generated in Spain. And the conclusion, which is what it says on this slide, that it's feasible and safe, positive impact on perioperative outcomes, which is what we're looking for, length of stay, how long people are in the ICU, how long they're on a breathing machine, can prevent clinical deterioration while waiting. This was surprising. People that were doing prehab while waiting didn't get sicker as fast as the ones that were not. They recommend that it is widely implemented. We all concluded that already without seeing the data. And they said survival benefits should be further investigated. And the reason is their group of patients did not have a survival benefit. They just had the same survival. So, and it's a small group. So the short metrics improve. So the tough one to change, which is survival, in this small series did not change. So they have 51 controls, 40 prehab patients. This is what happened. The people that went to prehab had shorter mechanical ventilation. You come out of the OR on a breathing tube. On the average, if you had no prehab, you spent 37 hours on that breathing machine before they took the tube out. If you did prehab, you only spent 20 hours. That is huge. That's what I said. Prehab, shorter ICU stay. If you were not in prehab, you spent 7 days in the ICU. If you had prehab, you only spent 5 days in it. It was 2 days of ICU care. Now, I don't know if you've ever been in the ICU, but you don't want to be there if you don't have to be there. Prehab, shorter length of stay. So the average, I told you the average nationally in the United States is 21 days from the earlier graph I showed you. So their average of the people who didn't have prehab was 23 days. And the average for the people who had the prehab was 18 days. So that's 2 days less in the hospital than the average in the United States. That's what I'm talking. That's really good.
Dr. Lopez, are any of these institutions planning on doing larger studies?
Oh, yeah.
Further
So
studies to see?
that's
to get-
exactly, yes, absolutely. We have to, so that's, I'm going to explain that in a second, why
Oh,
we did this
sorry.
project. You're leading me into where I want to say. But I'm just, I obviously doesn't sound like I have to convince you anymore, but I'm still trying to convince you it's a good idea. This is a meeting, I was at a meeting of surgeons and administrators trying to convince them that this is a good idea. So you're seeing the same data. But this was the one that got me really, really jazzed up. So all prehab patients except one, that was 93% of that 40, were discharged home after 18 days.
Wow.
On the average 18 days. Whereas 16 of the non-rehab patients, that's 31, that's 1 out of 3 of those patients, require non-home discharge to SNF, to a skilled nursing facility. So, you know, if I was a patient, I gotta get home. You know, home is my goal. Give me the finish line from this short experience. How soon can I get home? And there was no difference in complications or death in this small cohort. So it wasn't any better, wasn't any worse when it came to complications. So it's safe. That's what I interpret from this. It's a safe intervention in comparison to what we do routinely. So better short-term outcomes, safe, to me, it's a no deal. It doesn't matter, you don't have to argue it anymore as far as I'm concerned, even though it doesn't have the mortality that we would like to. I think we're going to need clinical trials of well-established programs to then show whether there is a mortality benefit.
There must be some description of what that rehab actually was too, right?
Absolutely. Thank you. So I have 10 minutes to tell you the entire project we did for exactly that point, which is what the heck do we put on a prehab program? Where do I go and get a manual off the shelf that tells me what the heck do I do for those patients? And the answer is we couldn't find one. So we said, well, let's put a project together to design one.
So is UC Davis going to do that? Are they going to?
On Wednesday, I begged them to do it.
In
Yeah.
So,
Javier's dream world, yes.
yeah, in my dream world, which I have
It
lots of
makes
dreams.
sense. It makes
So,
sense.
That's
I'm
why
going to
we
explain to you
have
what CoDesign is. To build a model, this is what we did. We basically took technology strategy on how to build that. How do you build a new phone? You do a CoDesign, right? So that's a technology concept. So CoDesign means that there's a lot. Here. CoDesign means that you work side by side between the people that are going to make it and the people that are going to use it. Okay, that's what CoDesign means. Not difficult conceptually. It does not mean you do a top-down process. I know how to do things. You're going to do this. Or a bottom-down process, which is the way I feel most of the time. I'm like, hey, we should do this. How come you're not doing it? And you're trying to shame them all the time from the bottom to do it because it's such a great thing. It's not neither one of those. It's co-design. You come at the table from the beginning and you have a conversation. What do I need? What do I want? How should it look like? How do you serve, the needs that I have as a consumer? So here's why. So the concept of co-design, it says the service user who's going to, in this case, the transplant patient who's waiting for their transplant, and the service provider, the healthcare providers, they get together towards a single goal of an effective outcome that they've agreed. And I show you the outcomes that trust me, the healthcare system wants these outcomes and the patient wants these outcomes. This is an agreeable outcome and better service experience. So how do we do it so you have a better experience when you're going through this stressful moment? So in the co-design, which is what we did, you gather people in a collaborative, collective as a group, and consultative. So tell me, what do you think? How do you think it should be done? And then we together intentionally engage in a conversation to create the solutions, innovate or improve existing solutions. Sometimes you don't have to build something, you just got to tweak it. That addresses the problem and opens the possibility for the better outcome. So that's the process of co-design. We did this. I'm going to skip that. This is what a usual co-design project. You gather people in a room like this. I do a 30-minute talk like this to kind of pump up everyone to what they need to do for the next 6 hours. And they get together and they talk and we do all kinds of activities and we end up putting ideas on little sticky notes and then we put them on the board and then we spend 3 or 4 hours having people come and go and they go and work out and they eat something and they come back to the board and move things around and we just keep moving things around until everyone in the room comes, yeah, that sounds like the way to do it. And at the end, you put a report together as a group. We think this should happen first, that should happen. That's what a co-design happens. It didn't happen that way because we had a pandemic. And during a pandemic, you don't get together and do this. So we had to do it in a different way. We did it on Zoom electronically. We got Zoom meetings, gather all the providers through Zoom. We have multiple of these meetings. We recorded all the meetings. During the Zoom meeting, we managed to give them a Jamboard that they could do on their computer so they could do stickies and write their ideas and we color coded. So we actually captured that part of it. But because we had to have different groups at different times and all that, we in these 2 steps, we didn't have all the providers see all the information and share all the information back to us. So we then generate some surveys. So we send them surveys of what we learned from these 2 experiences and say, hey, now rank this, tell us, what do you think is more important? So we had a number of surveys, lots of data, lots of information, and came up with their view of what should be done and how it should be done. Then we gathered patients. And so we managed to gather patients for focus groups and individual interviews, this is what Sharon did. And so these were people who were currently wait list for transplant. So we went to UCLA, we went to Stanford, and actually some people at UC Davis who were waiting locally for their transplant. And we ultimately talked to 10 patients. 3 of them had already just had their transplant. 7 of them were waiting for the transplant. And we talked to 3 caregivers of 3 of these patients. So then we got their voice of what they thought. We asked them the same questions we asked the providers, gave them the same talk, pumped them up, and set up the question. And then we got to listen. I'm going to skip the barriers because time is short. I still don't have an email that says I can play the video, the voice I'll be reading. So what did we ultimately said to the patients? We said, well, what should we include in a prehab program for patients on a heart transplant wait list? It wasn't a difficult question to ask, maybe a little harder to answer. So we said to them, inpatient and outpatient, think of it in both spaces. A lot of these patients are in the hospital waiting. So think of that space as well as the outpatient. This is the outpatient space, but this actually may not be appropriate for most patients in this condition. They're in the hospital with IVs. Some of them have pumps in their chest. There are all kinds of limitations to be in the outpatient state. Can we do it? We said, be creative. We said, think outside of the box. And then my favorite was the magic wand. We gave all of them a magic wand. It's an imaginary magic wand. You go like this and you can do whatever the hell you want. And money's not an option, not a limitation. And you can break any barrier that comes to mind. And if you actually had that power, what would it look like? And we challenged them to give us that version. I'm going to read you a few quotes. So this is so we came up with a number of topics. Education was the strongest one that came through. This patient, we asked them about the types of things that they value to have included in the program. And this patient said, education, being, not being treated like we couldn't understand what was going on in our bodies. I was very appreciative of the fact that they educated us or you, but they didn't talk down to you. What we said to people is like, imagine being in that moment, or if you're in that moment right now, tell us what the experiences are with the providers you're having right now, and how do you think it could be better for you? And so this person's describing what was happening to them. They wanted your feedback on, everything that was going on in the process. And so you were part of the process. You weren't just taking orders. You weren't just taking pills. You were obviously the integral part of your prehab program. And they said the way the doctors they're included and educated me, I think made a big difference. This person is talking about what actually happened to them and how good it was that they educated them so much in this program.
Asking about.
I'm not supposed to do that. Here's a patient talking about the medications. Again, this is about education medication. Well, this is going to sound stupid, but really knowing what they mean, meaning the medications and what they're used for. I have 11 or 12 medications I take through the day. I didn't really know what half of them are for. So I had to Google it, and then I put them on a spreadsheet so I can understand it. But even you have to know the alternate names, like Coumadin could be warfarin and could be something else. So knowing what the different names are too. Because if you're talking to the pharmacies or ordering through the pharmacies, you don't have what you're saying. You don't know what they're saying. You know, I need this, and they go, I have this. And I'll be like, is that the same thing? So really understanding what the medications are, the different terminology for the different types of medicine. So the patients are telling us, we're utterly confused with our medicine. Educate us better. This resonates with you here. Next one was exercise, and I'll read the quote. Patient said, I think that we should walk on treadmills to build up you. We walk around the hospital, but I think a treadmill will help us. The little walks that we doing, I think the treadmill will help us to get our motivation going and get us stronger, or that will help you towards your effort at getting better. And I think we should have drawings. You know, you go to the room where we can draw and paint, help motivation. That's something that you are moving your arms and doing it yourself. So if you're not moving your arms and stuff now, you will do it with painting. You got to go up and down, right over there, do this, do that. And I think that would help. I think it was very telling in that moment to realize how people feel in that bed, that they're doing nothing. Everything has been done for them. And that is something that we as healthcare providers forget of that experience. And so we captured it.
My wife's a art therapist. We're like,
physical therapy. The facilitator is Sharon. So thinking about a program that's like that, that would help you both physically and emotionally to help you get ready for the heart transplant. What things do you think will be most helpful to you, including the program? Definitely need physical therapy. She said, have you gotten any physical therapy since you've been on the balloon pump? This is somebody on the balloon pump, on a pump. Patient said, I have been doing physical therapy exercise in my bed. So he's telling us, even in the bed, we need to be having it's important. Even if I'm bedridden, I should be moving. I should be doing something.
Thinking of
Psychosocial now. This is about psychiatrists in the hospital. Facilitator now says, you asked for it. Okay, good for you. I asked for, and the patient says, I asked for help. That's wonderful, says the facilitator. And they come once a week, you said? Yes. Or if you need it for twice a week, they come. It's according to your needs. All right. And they talk to you, whatever is it that you feel is important to talk about? Yeah. They don't tell you what to talk about. They come, they're there to help you so you get off your chest what you're going through. They're here for us. That's a wonderful and has been helpful. Yes, it is very helpful for me because I get to express what I'm going through and all the things that are on my mind. Because some of the things that are on my mind is the reason why I can't go to sleep. So, work on that. That's bothering people in their minds so that they can rest better and they can be a little more relaxed.
for it. Okay.
So families like that, an acknowledgement that they needed psychological help.
Absolutely. So this one is about psychosocial and depression. The facilitator says, are there any other things that have gotten in the way that you can think of? The patient said, at one point I think I was kind of going through a depression and I didn't want to take no medicines. I didn't want to do anything or nothing. I was lying in bed, had been lying in bed for 21 days and kept telling myself, this is it. I prayed. My mom passed away and I talked to her, things like that. I just kind of told them, this is it. If he takes me now, I'm ready. But eventually my brother and my sister came in and told me, and my daughter and told me, look, you got to get out of the bed. I had not showered or nothing for the duration that time I was in bed. 21 days without a shower. Nutrition. This patient said, I agree on the diet part. I think like the sometimes you would go in there and all the doc you have got those meetings and they come in and they kind of tell you what to do, what to expect, and things like that. And I think something just dealing with the dietitian, it was a lot of times it was just, you're just giving paperwork, to kind of, here's that, here's what to eat, here's not what to eat. Some of you know the portion size and some guidelines, and that was really about it. But like it said, like having to me, it would have been more beneficial if you have a cooking class, or I think I would want to do that. I always thought this person is speaking with a lot of muletillas, so having the patient bring in a list of what they eat on the daily basis. Now the patient's saying that it would be nice if they would ask us what we're eating and bring a list and say over the week, and on the 20th, and the 10th said, look, I'd start writing down everything you're eating. So you just got to keep a log. So it's talking about a log. So you have food in a list and they're eating and get more ideas on what to eat. We cancel this and find things that so he's talking about deleting from the list the things that you don't want to or you're not supposed to eat. Or we just get rid of this and we just figure out something that can help them. So basically talking about a discussion about a real discussion, not a guideline, here's what to do, here's what the American Heart Association says, to eat 30 grams of it. But really, should I be eating 2 pieces of broccoli? Or should I be adding, this sauce or not to my food? It's very practical, which I know in this program, you guys do that and know what that means.
Yeah, I agree.
So this is actually an interesting concept. We didn't ask for this. These are 2 things that just came off spontaneously without us asking or even thinking about. We as the designers of this didn't think this would be things we should be asking about. The patients told us 8 out of 10 and 5 out of 10 said they wanted to know better what to expect. It drove them crazy not knowing what the next day and the next day would be like. And what to expect once the transplant got here, what to expect the first day and the first week and the first month and the first year out of it. And they thought this is just a clear deficiency of what was presented to them. And they wanted more of this. And then the other thing that came across is they wanted to hear more from people like them, other transplant patients, other people with heart failure. They didn't want to just hear again from another white-coated dude or dudette that came by with some big brochure to tell them. They wanted to hear from peers. So they thought the value of peers, patients talking to patients and activities and cooking class and groups would be really helpful. And this is the whole concept of peer mentoring. So this is how I did it. This is how when I got to that, there was one patient talked a lot about his bowels. He's like, I wish somebody would help me, tell me, first of all, prepare me to the idea that I was going to have so many problems with my bowels. And then how others dealt with that. And we thought that would have been very helpful to have that conversation.
Sort of what happens here.
Yeah, because that's what's important, right? Everything can be good and dandy, but if we're not going to the bathroom, we're struggling.
I'm talking about generally, you have heart failure here, you have atrial fib here, you have diabetes here, and you have colleagues who have been there.
Yeah, on these very basic real things that we deal with every day.
But, the American Heart used to have a great program called Bended Hearts, which was exactly that, just a group of guys that had heart issues. And it died, right? Do they still have it?
They did not too long ago, probably been a couple of years that I checked.
I remember the last time I tried to look into it, it didn't exist anymore.
That's too bad.
And it was just kind of like a support group kind of conversation.
People that were part of volunteers that had heart trouble and were available for other people to tap into.
Yeah. It was like a buddy system or some
Yeah.
sort.
It's a great idea.
Yeah, it is.
And sad that there's people out there that want to share and there's people out there that want to be shared with,
Right.
and it needs the coordination to just put them together. And
Yeah, yeah.
Sometimes it's just one event. They don't need necessarily the answer.
That's right.
It could be.
You listen. Yeah.
Right, and have somebody been there.
With all the technology and.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's sad. It's sad. It's so much stuff that actually makes sense. It's so hard to implement. And what's wrong with us?
We've lost a little bit of the common sense. Common sense has become a rare commodity.
Didn't make any money.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a dice.
Yeah.
My heart visit.
I didn't put a student on that for sure.
Upcoming events, so maybe they.
Yeah, that came out through this conversation. Everybody thought technology should be leveraged to facilitate the communication, the peer group, the peer mentoring, that technology should be used for that. They didn't want to see more, impersonal stuff. They wanted to actually create connectivity and education through technology. They all felt every one of them talked about in real-time experiences as well as videos that they could look at any time of the day or night. So in the middle of the night, your mind just gets locked into that thing. You can go and listen and learn more about that and not have to depend and wait for next week's group that's meeting before you can actually talk about that. So they were very interested on the ability to access content and conversations, which them has had a great idea, which is leveraged from the VA. The VA currently has some of these programs where they have these 1 to 2 minute clips of people's experiences in different topics from mental health and others, which have been very successful in helping people learn and communicate. So I'm hoping he'll push that with this program. So, there's actually, I think,
So you're saying
3 or 4 of these.
Everyone.
I hear those
So-
voices. I think it's people in our Zoom that are checking. It's not.
No, what?
I think it's people out here talking, but it's not.
No, it's I have the clips, but I am not allowed to show them yet. So I'm allowed to show the words, but not the voice. I'm going to end with this one. So this is the last quote that we had. It was about individualize the program. The patient said, everyone is different. I think that the key for you guys or for the caregivers is to identify the individual needs of that person, the differences of that person, and tailor programs to meet that, rather than to have a program and go there and go, here's our program. You get to fit into whatever you fit into it. So, and I thought that was a good way of saying, we can put models together, we can put prescriptions together, but ultimately we have to sit down and talk to people and see how it's going to work out, which is this patient captured the entire concept of this project. It's how do we get closer to that experience of what people would experience, and how do we build a program around those experiences rather than just having a whole bunch of medical guidelines to do it. And so I'm going to end there. It was a very productive. We came up with all the concepts. We have clusters. We have the materials to now build the program based on these data sets. And I'm not going to go over all this anymore, but I'll just end with the fact that Themis is putting today a grant. If we're up all night last night finishing it to actually get this started as a program. So,
And the surgeons are on board too, right?
the surgeons are on board. The surgeons liked it. They actually, this morning, the head of surgery, which was not at the meeting on Wednesday, invited me to give the same talk to their surgeons in their program. So I think it's getting traction. And so I'll end there. Sorry, I took a long.
No, that's okay.
Me reading it takes a little longer than if you actually listen to every one of those clips is about 45 seconds long. So they're not that long, but I realized me reading it is a little clunkier.
I think Dodie had a question.
Yes, I just want to say that I would give you 5 stars for your second presentation. It was really, really good.
Thank you so
And
much.
let me know if you run for Congress. I think we could use.
I think you better stay in medicine. You're more comfortable later.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
You might have a point.
I
Maybe you should get out of the hospital world and go into the.
I'm just too,
Sell your soul to do that.
yeah, I'm trying to think, there's a word in Spanish, I'm too bobo. Bobo is the word that I don't know how to say it in English.
Thank you, Dr. Lopez. Very informative. Appreciate
You're
it.
welcome. You're welcome. It's the idea that you just, you're just the nice guy in the corner who will not do everyone. You just don't make it as a politician. If you're just a nice guy that knocks to everyone. So,
Yeah, very exciting, very cool that you're involved in this too. That is really exciting.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I'm going to give kudos to Linda and to Dr. Bukapanan, because 5 years ago, when this opportunity to getting into rehab came about, I was like, shall I do this or not? And the two of them were at a meeting together, and the two of them said, no, we'll help you. We'll support you to get there. Because I knew it was going to be a big challenge. And so I got to thank them for the last 5 years to support me getting into this journey of rehabilitation. And so this is the first product of new, not just building on top of what's been built already, but to develop new space in academics for rehabilitation. So this is kind of becoming them as my child here.
Well, hopefully. we'll get you a
And
bigger
so we're
room, too,
excited
so-
about this, and this is the result of your support and experience in this program, learning from you all. So it's a community of learning.